Hello, and welcome to the Exit presented by Flippa. This is a 30-minute podcast featuring amazing entrepreneurs who have been there and they have done it. The Exit talks to operators who have bought and sold businesses of all different sizes. You'll learn how they did it, why they did it, and get exposure to the world of exits. It's a world occupied by a small few, but accessible to many. And on this episode, I sit down with Mike Finger. He's a fantastic serial entrepreneur who has owned 8 businesses and had successful exits in multiple businesses of those 8. So he does a good job of walking us through all the different exits that he's had. He's bought businesses, sold businesses, including car washes, and he's done a good job of giving back to his entrepreneurial community where he's based in Wisconsin. So we go through, brokerages, how the process works for selling businesses, both brick and mortar and online. And we talk a lot about how preparing for a business is important from the start. And he touches on something very important that is focusing on sustainability as a business first, and then focusing on the sellability of it. Because if you can focus on the sustainability of a business, you're able to outlast, let's say, if somebody turns down a deal or the deal goes south and it's not going to go through, you need to be able to sustain. So we talk a lot about that. He talks about his burnout of his first business that he was going through the sales process of. And I love a couple portions of this where he talks through actually sawing his kitchen table in half with his wife and accepting people to come into their house to do visits and consultations with 2 desks that are made out of 1 kitchen table. So fantastic conversation here with Mike Finger. So without further ado, let's dive right into the interview. All right, guys, I am joined today by Mike Finger, the owner of Exit Oasis. How's it going, Mike?
Hey, Steve, great to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. So before we get into Exit Oasis and your experience with small business buying and selling, let's talk about your background. What got you into business and how did you end up starting Exit Oasis?
Sure. So I got to take you back a couple of years. My wife and I started our first business in the mid 90s. We literally cut our dining room table in half to make 2 desks and started serving clients out of our living room. It was a business that was set up to help small nonprofits and associations. We did back office support work, everything from executive director to receptionist level services. And I was a growth junkie, so I was lucky enough to see that business grow. And then a couple of years in, we tripped across another similar opportunity in a slightly different market. And grew those businesses over 10 years and got to about 50 full-time employees. 2005, I woke up one morning, I looked in the mirror and I saw this crispy piece of toast looking back at me. It was, that realization that the joke I was making about my, scheduling in my heart attack, that maybe it wasn't all that funny and that there was a fair amount of truth in it. I was just burned out. And I think a lot of business owners have gotten there. And then that's when I had that experience that at the time I thought was unique to me, but I've since learned is pretty common. And I still remember the day sitting in my office at my desk, hanging up the phone after talking to the 3rd business broker who told me, "I'm sorry, Mike, I can't sell your business for you. Too owner dependent, not enough cash flow." I mean, fill in the blank on the number of standard answers for why my business was unsellable, but professionally, unquestionably, that was a rock bottom for me. I would have sold my business for a nickel. I was that done, but it wasn't an option at the time, and so I spent the next 5 years changing that business so that 5 years later, in 2010, we were at exactly the same size, but we were able to make a successful exit from the business. And that was a miracle do-over for me in my professional life. I can't explain how different it felt the next morning, like an 80-pound sack of potatoes had been lifted off my back.
Mm.
So I think a lot of sellers have that, have that journey, have that experience, and have that feeling afterwards. The next step for me was to explore. I spent a year working as a business broker. Was able to, help business owners buy and sell. Loved part of that, hated part of that. After that year, went to work running a small accelerator in our area for about 3 years. All that time working with small business owners, helping them start up and grow their businesses faster. Got the itch back, and so what came next was a period where I bought and sold two small service businesses. And so found myself then at the end of that journey, having successfully sold 4 businesses, purchased a couple. I've owned 8 businesses. So if you do the math on that, you can see there's a couple failures in there that we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about, but we can go there. And that brought me to that place where I was asking, what do I want to do next? What do I want to spend my time talking about, and how do I think I can have the most impact?
Mhm. Yeah, I find that question comes up quite a bit with entrepreneurs in after an exit. Just how can I not only give back, but how can I help others? And it is a fascinating characteristic that keeps bubbling up. And I think that there's something there that's tied into just creating a business for customers. And once you have that product market fit, you feel that you've met that need and you've
Yep.
scratched that itch. So after that's gone, that a lot of people feel like that itch can be scratched by helping fellow entrepreneurs. And I love the kind of characteristic there. So the businesses, the 8 that you've owned, that's a great number. In terms of the ones that you sold, what was the process like for going through the sale? Obviously, you talked us through the first one, but there's quite a few exits there. So could you talk us through briefly on each one and
Sure.
how they occurred?
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Unintentionally, I've had the opportunity to touch a number of different methods, right? The first one was through a business broker. The more traditional methodology of, I think from start to finish there, it was probably about a 14-month time period.
Mhm.
Um, so that was the sale of the first 2 businesses. We bundled that sale. The second business that I sold, we sold. I owned 2 small businesses at the time. I ran a free Craigslist ad to sell the smaller of the 2, to explore doing that myself, and inadvertently met the buyer who ended up buying the larger business that I owned at that time 45 days later. So no broker, no commission, no nothing there. Um, so it felt like time and chance, right? I mean, there were certainly some luck involved in that, but also elements of it that the business was prepared to be lucky, if you will. And then the last one, it was a small car wash, and I ended up selling it through a real estate broker. I knew the owner or the buyer was probably going to be someone local. The agent was a local agent, knew the market, had a strong network. It was in a small rural area, and we were able to sell successfully that way. So again, lots of different methods, but some good outcomes. So
Mhm.
I sometimes, I mean, we'd like to think as owners that there's one path to get us there. It doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, I like that you've had multiple different types of businesses and gone through different strategies for each one for an exit. I think that alone, the learning for each one of those, I'm sure builds confidence for the future of saying like, okay, well, worst case scenario, if this one doesn't work out, I'm going to go buy a car wash and I know exactly how I'm going to go through the process of selling that afterwards. Because I think there's a lot of confusion around exit strategies. Like how do you start out of the gate with an exit strategy? So let's talk a little bit about what you were tracking. Obviously, these businesses are totally different. I mean, a car wash is dramatically different than some of these other ones. So what were you tracking in terms of knowing you were going to sell one day? What were the key performance indicators that you'd say you tracked?
Yeah, it's interesting that you ask that. I can remember the moment, with that first business where I reached a point where it's like, how could I have gotten this so wrong? How could this business not be sellable? How could I have worked so hard? I had, what I think you'll probably recognize as a common experience, because I thought I was paying attention, Steve.
Mhm.
I read the article that said a business like mine should sell for 2 times revenue. And so then I focused on growing revenue and got it to a place where I thought, well, even if I only sell for 1 times revenue, that's enough runway for me to do what I want to do next. Only to learn that revenue is completely meaningless when it came to selling a business. And so that was the big struggle for me going through that. It wasn't about a simple metric. I think you hit on the key when you talked about confusion in this entire industry, the complexity of this entire industry. What became clear to me is that the system is compensated by managing complexity, right? If I talk to a broker, if I talk to a funder, if I the offering is usually about some special measurement that's going to determine. What I found was 3 simple questions. Are my results desirable? Can a buyer duplicate my results? And can I document my results? When I sold the first 2 businesses, that's where we had landed, is focusing on that basic sellability that would allow any of a number of buyers to come in. So when I transferred that knowledge to a different business, truthfully, I found myself buying and selling those businesses to prove to myself that what I had learned wasn't a fluke. If you can answer yes to those simple questions, you can sell your business much, much easier than if you can't.
Mhm. I liked what you said earlier also about the looking in the mirror and seeing burnt toast. I
Yeah.
think that's a very vivid image of burnout, and I think a lot of people listening can very much relate to that. I can relate to that. I think that there's a lot of psychology around that concept of building something and really just needing to move on to the next, just because the reason that you got successful was because of that yearning to move on.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about timing. I think there's a lot of young people out there that are always curious, from guys that have sold and started 8 businesses and sold many. What would you say is the right timing? Obviously, it's open ended in terms of all these different types of businesses and to the seller themselves. But for the hustlers out there, the young hustlers out there, what would you recommend in terms of evaluating the right time to sell a business?
For me, the key for that is a 2-step process. The first thing I think a small business owner needs to drive to get to is sustainability, right? If the clock is ticking, if the money's running out, if you're not producing, profit and putting something back in your bank account, let's not talk about the exit. Let's not worry about what comes next. If you haven't reached sustainability, I don't care if it's a brick and mortar service business or a website. I think the first step in the exit process is sustainability, because then it's okay if it takes 3 years instead of 3 months for something to happen. Once you reach sustainability, your brain needs to start engaging this question of sellability. And I honestly think it's one of the big mistakes that most small business owners make. It's The problem is that we wait to engage this topic. We think we can wait until we're ready to sell to start thinking about getting the business ready for sale. And the problem is we got to get in front of ourselves. We've got, because so many of these things that a buyer is going to look at might take you years to modify in your business. That's what I found in my first business, right? I built this machine that did certain things very well. One of the things it didn't do well is create profit. Okay, so I had to change that. I figured out how to change that. But once it had been changed, now I had to wait 24 to 36 months to build up a track record of profitability to prove that what I had done worked. So for me, the question of timing is that think about when you want to sell and then back up 5 years and start spending a little bit of time on this topic every month. I'm not talking about, we hear the stories about orchestrating a sale, about, lining everything up. I'm going to sell in, 2023 in February and line everything. That so rarely happens in terms of just playing the numbers. What usually happens is what happened to me or others. I get to a place and it's like I'm done, or you find another opportunity, or you see something happening that makes you go, I don't want to be here anymore, but I don't have a choice. That is a miserable place to be as a small business owner.
Mhm.
Step one, sustainability, instantly transition into sellability.
Got it. Well said. Well said. So, one question I'm curious about, and this is a little bit different, is that the team. I think that with serial entrepreneurs like yourself that have bought and sold, different businesses, you've run 8 businesses. Do you have a core team that is helping you on a consistent basis? Or for each one of these, were you plugging into a team and then exiting and then plugging into a new team and then exiting? What was that like for you?
The team was critical. They made the sale possible. And of course, the buyer wanted to retain the team.
Hmm.
So, I mean, the value, a large part of the value that you create as a business owner is the team that you put together to create the results after you leave. And so that team stayed with the first sale, which meant I was off and running, building again from scratch. And that's a challenge. Part of the struggle for me it was that that team was fabulous at what they did, but I wasn't a great manager. I was a fairly heavy stress manager, and so what ultimately worked at the end of those first 2 businesses was building a team and then isolating myself from it because whenever I interacted with them, I tended to mess up what they were doing well. So the team was key, but like I said, the buyer wanted those folks to stay because they provided so much value.
Got it. Got it. So before we get to the finale question that a lot of people look forward to, what are you working on now? Let's talk a little bit about Exit Oasis.
Yeah, yeah. Exit Oasis was really my reaction to the recognition that when I wanted to learn about selling a small business or preparing for sale, that I got hit with that wall of complexity that I talked about earlier, right? We both know that you can, start your online search and instantly find yourself with a resource that'll tell you about ESOPs or some other technical tool that applies to a minuscule number of exits. And I found myself trying to land on what the simple approach was. Steve, if I asked you, if we surveyed 100 doctors about what is it, what do you need to do to be healthy, to live longer, we know that 99 out of 100 of them are going to land on eat right and exercise. Right? That's a simple approach to being healthy. Well, what's the simple approach to preparing a small business for sale? It's not out there because the system doesn't care so much about the smallest of business owners, which of course is the largest audience of business owners. And so the Exit Oasis was an exercise and a passion of mine to try to figure out what is that simple approach that a small business owner can focus on that's going to allow them to continue to work their 10, 12-hour days running the business, but in the back of their mind, continue to evolve the decisions they're making so that that exit they desire is possible. And so Exit Oasis is designed to provide content. We create, we curate. If there's good stuff out there, we put it on the site. Ultimately, that's primarily the goal of the site. I do some coaching with small business owners, but ultimately the project is designed to help small business owners learn the basics, really, truly those foundational elements that are applicable to every small business owner that's out there.
Got it. Very cool. Very cool. So that leads us to our finale question, the one that we
Sure.
ask everybody on the show just to get a good perspective from seasoned entrepreneurs like yourself. So knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself 10 years ago?
I've been a listener to the podcast, so I was prepped for the question, and I'm gonna change it, Steve, because the 10-year ago Mike had just sold the business, and he was floating high and loving life, and I don't think I'd mess with that bliss. If I could back up another 10 years from that to that truly small business owner startup guy, it would be to trust the authenticity of your personal journey. I at that time would have a tendency to listen to a podcast like this and think, that's the way I do it, or listen, read an article, that's the way I do it. The wisest small business owners I've run into from that point are the ones that listen to the podcast and take the 5% that applies best to them. And they read the article and they take that piece and they build their own recipe of success. So it's about trusting the authenticity of your own journey, in my mind.
Well said. Well said. Well, those are all the questions I have for you. Where can people go and connect with you and learn more about what you're working on?
Yeah, great. I'm real active on LinkedIn, so that's a great place to reach out to me and connect. And then obviously exitoasis.com. There's a contact tool there. You can reach out to us or just consume. Again, the content is designed for that small business owner.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, wherever you guys are listening to this on iTunes, Spotify, or SoundCloud, definitely check the show notes. All the links that Mike mentioned are in there. But once again, thank you so much for coming on the show, Mike.
My pleasure, Steve. Thank you.